Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here again at our weekly webinar for small businesses. So this week we will discuss the strategies for tenants if the landlord won't renegotiate your lease. I wanted to apologize that Jessica, our president, will not be here today. Probably she will join us a little bit later, but I'm not sure about it. But meanwhile, I wanted to remind you that a recorded version of this webinar will be sent later today, along with the presentations that we are about to see. And today we will try to answer all the questions that you have. Always on our chat room, please, if you have any question, write your question on the chat room on your left. Otherwise, our help desk has been working nonstop, answering any questions or concern. If you want, please email helpdesk@manhattancc.org. Again, helpdesk@manhattancc.org, or call the 212-473-7875. Again, 212-473-7875. Today, we're gonna start with our amazing experts. It's a follow-up of a 2 weeks ago webinar that was very successful, and today we have again Ruth Kohlhaber, founder and partner at Wharton Property Advisors, and obviously Deborah Guzov from Guzov LLC, that she's been very helpful and amazing and been at all our weekly webinars. So we will start with Ruth. Today we have many topics to discuss. So please, Ruth, thank you for being here again, and I will talk to you after your presentation.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to share my notes here. First, I just want to thank the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce for having me on. In particular, Nadia Ben Saad and Jessica Walker, and thank you to Deborah Guzov, who always gives a terrific presentation. So let's just set the stage here. Since we last spoke 2 weeks ago, I am assuming that many of you have got leases for space. Either you've determined you have too much space, you can't afford it, it's not the right situation for your business, and basically you need to do something to relieve the liability. Of course, your first stop is to go to your landlord and to try to negotiate with he or she and get some breaks. You've, I am guessing, been in conversations via email and phone, asking for free rent, asking for a reduction in the security deposit to cover some of the current rent, asking for some help. And your landlord is probably coming to you now and saying, you know what, I have my own expenses, I have my own problems, and I can't help you reduce your rent. But you know what, you can go sublease your space. And that's where we're going to kick it off. So going to the next slide. What is the sublet market, and how can you access this in a way in which can help you alleviate some of your liability? So first of all, just to give you an overview of the office space market in New York City, the total office space inventory is 295 million square feet. So this is the biggest market in the world. Of the total inventory, what is available? Available on a direct basis by landlords, is approximately 24 million square feet. What is available on the sublet market is about 9 million square feet. So sublets comprise about 38% of the total office availability in New York. Now, these numbers are probably going to be changing. The market has essentially been closed for 2 months, and many companies that have sublet space, plus many companies such as landlords that have direct space, are not putting their space on the market until the market reopens and the spaces can be shown. So what that means is we don't really know how much space is available, and also there have been almost no transactions. And, to give you an idea, I'm on webinars such as this with landlords and their agents many times a week. And as you might imagine, these landlords and their brokers, these are not modest, bashful people, okay? When they have transactions and they have a lot of business, they like talking about it. And the last call I was on, with approximately 50 people, the question was asked, who's doing deals? Are there any leases being signed? And it was determined that there was one. Again, this is the biggest market in the world. So that gives you a sense of how frozen things are right now. And the landlords can't determine the price on the space, and neither can you as a potential sub-landlord. So going to the next slide, given this situation right now and your own needs, which I am sure there is quite a bit of urgency involved for many of you, what can you do to successfully sublease your space and thereby reduce this massive rent revenue, massive rent liability rather? Unfortunately, it's not revenue, but this massive rent liability that you're dealing with. So the first thing you want to do is understand exactly what you're paying all in. As many of you know for sure, it's not just rent that you're paying. You're also paying your share in real estate taxes for the building. You're paying operating expenses. You're paying an electric charge. You're paying cleaning. And all these items, while they're a lot smaller than the rent, they definitely add up. You're going to want to speak with a leasing agent to help you with this entire process and to help you understand what you're paying all in and what you can get for your space. What is the rate for direct and sublet space in your building? What does the agent think that your space might be worth? This agent also, it's very important that they help you understand all the costs for a sublet. Your biggest cost is going to be brokerage commissions. When you lease space, when you come in from the outside into a building and you lease space, you don't pay any brokerage commissions. Those are all paid by the landlord. But now you're the one trying to lease space. So now the brokerage commissions are your obligation. And then, of course, you will have some legal fees because you will need some type of sublease document or, at a minimum, a license agreement for your space. I have one colleague in this business, Richard Warshauer, who often bemoans to me the fact that there aren't more alcoholics among the sub-landlords in New York because he thinks there are a lot of valuable lessons to be learned from Alcoholics Anonymous. And that goes especially for this process of subleasing. The biggest lesson is you don't want to be in denial. You need to accept the fact that no matter how fantastic your space is, you're not going to actually make money subleasing your space. In fact, you're quite likely to lose money. However, if your sublease is done well, you could recoup 75% approximately of your remaining liability. So how do you make sure you get the most that you can for a sublet? You're going to want to get creative. You, and this is really your agent's responsibility too, are going to want to structure a sublet offering that meets the needs of today's market. Now, we don't know exactly yet what today's tenants are looking for because there haven't been any space showings. However, there is a real sense that tenants and really people, they want flexibility now. So if you have 10 years left on your lease, you may want to offer tenants coming in saying, okay, I'll do a 1 year for now, and then I'll give you a right to extend. You want to be as flexible as possible and as attractive as possible to those tenants that are looking for space so that they choose your sublet out of all the different options out there. Another very important thing is the pricing. I saw Barbara Corcoran speak a couple of years ago, and it made a big impact on me because Barbara Corcoran said, when I bring a new house to the market, I want to underprice that house. I don't want to, yes, I want a high price, and yes, I want to sell it for a lot of money. But if the price is too high, no one is going to come look at the house. The house is going to be sitting there in a year, and everyone will have lost very important time and money. So the same goes for subleasing your space. You want to offer a cheap deal, and you want action. You want people coming to look at it because the price can always be bid up, but you want offers and you want activity. So how you're going to price this space is a very important part of the component of the whole sublease package. And I'm going to turn it over now to Deborah to talk about the legal aspects of this process, and then we'll go into some questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming back to hear more about the landlord-tenant scenario and trying to get creative with ways we can forge ahead. And just as an aside, legal aspects, as Ruth stated earlier, it will be important to document your sublease, and in all likelihood, if you'll need some approval from your landlord, so you will need to interface with your landlord in order to affect the sublease of your space. So if you are lucky enough to find someone to sublet, it is important to properly document, make sure you meet all the requirements for real estate, which is you must have your sublease in writing, and make sure that you give yourself as much protection as you can with respect to your subtenant. And as always, interface with the landlord so that you can get proper approvals. So I'm going to talk about worst case scenarios now. What if we can't sublet and we're stuck? So I'm going to share with you a PowerPoint, which will be available through the chamber. And you can take a look at it in more detail later. And as usual, anyone who has any questions, even after the fact, please reach out to the help desk. Francisco, who runs the help desk, is amazing, and he will get you to one of us to answer your questions. So if you require more time than just hearing our broad overview, please reach out. So, as we know, this is a problem which we now have to face. And as I discussed the last time, be very clear in what you are trying to achieve before you reach out to your landlord. Make sure you know what you can and cannot do. And I know that this can be really overwhelming right now because we don't know what the future brings for us a month from now or a day from now, but do try to get your projections together, speak with your financial advisor or your accountant, and see what you can and cannot do, because if you have that conversation with the landlord, you need to be able to really follow through. So what do? Well, one thing that we can do is, and this is more common in the retail arena, and again, I understand most retail spaces cannot even be open right now. But one of the scenarios that is common in the retail arena is to do some sort of a modification where the landlord would be able to get a percentage of revenue. And this might be attractive. And again, it doesn't sound like a great idea because you're starting out at a loss, but being able to stay in your space and earn income and paying a small amount of revenue to the landlord to keep things going and get some at least immediate relief from the landlord may be a way to allow you to hold on to your space. Generally, this is not done in the non-retail arena, and certainly, professional service firms have restrictions on fee sharing and things of that nature. But be creative, think out of the box. If you're not in one of those enterprises which would be precluded from sharing revenue with another party who's a non-professional, then certainly look into it and see if there is a way where you might be able to provide some level of revenue to the landlord, again, to get yourself a reprieve and maybe put things on hold for a period of time and make some sort of a payment through your income stream as it comes through. The other thing is we can talk about ways that we can look to other tenants in our spaces to see what we can put together. Now, we're not trying to take a landlord or a tenant position. Everyone is in very deep into this situation. But if a group of tenants come up with a concept, perhaps the group will have greater strength. One of the things, again, I think I mentioned this last time, is every business, as we discussed last week, has to have a back to work safety plan, including landlords. So if your landlord has said, okay, you can't use the space right now, or you can, but it's open for business, but they haven't provided that plan, you may have an element of leverage to say, I should not be in a position where I have to pay rent in light of the fact that you are not providing me with a safe space. So if you have a group of tenants that can get some traction with that concept, you may gain some leverage as a group in getting some sort of a reprieve from the landlord. Maybe it's a month of free rent. I mean, that is always the best scenario. When we are first leasing our spaces, one of the things we always ask for is, can we get a month of free rent? And be creative. Perhaps you are able to pay for a period of time, but you need something done in your space. Maybe now is the time to speak with the landlord and say, okay, look, I can continue to pay, but this is what I need from you. I need you to pay to reconfigure my space so that it's safe for my employees to come in. Remember, as employers, we are going to have guidelines that we are providing safe spaces to our employees, places they can sit and social distance, and making sure that cleaning measures are taken, making sure that elevators are properly functioning in order. So, we really can use those elements as talking points or points of negotiation with the landlord. So again, it is a good time if you are in a larger building, or even if you're in a smaller building, to try to get in touch with your neighbors and see what other people are doing. It will also give you a barometer of where the points of negotiation may be. And here, exchange of information is going to be key. So most definitely, do what you can, whether it's speaking to the security people to get email contact information, but put it all together and see what you can do as a group. And there are other things that you might think about. Some of them might be something where you look for further sources of lending. And landlords should be looking for further sources of lending as well, because the response to the tenants is generally, go find yourself some federal money so you can pay your rent. But that is not really a great solution, because regrettably, the way the payroll protection program has been put together, most people cannot even use the 25% to cover a month's rent. So that's a problem. So one thing that landlords as well as tenants can do if they meet certain guidelines is to look into the Main Street lending program, where you can get a larger loan. So if you qualify, certainly look into it, because it will give you greater bandwidth. It will give you a greater source of funding if you are stuck in a position where your landlord is just not going to negotiate with you and is insisting on the rent and penalizing you. We are seeing instances where landlords are saying, we have to earn a living too. And so if you pay late, we are going to impose late fees. And unfortunately, this just exacerbates the situation. Other options could be that you look to the landlord for some sort of a loan where you say, okay, a low interest loan, you will let me, pay over the course of time, amortize my rent over a period of months, we'll enter into a separate loan agreement. Obviously, if you do this, please reach out to get counsel on whether the interest rate is appropriate, and also speak to your accountant to make sure that this new situation where you're going to have a loan payment is going to be a payment that you can sustain. The other thing is to offer up some sort of a termination right to the landlord, saying, okay, things may improve and I have a prime space and you may be able to get more money for it. So landlord, I will agree to vacate under certain circumstances if you find a new tenant for my space and it is a tenant that is better suited to you. I agree to step aside. Again, this is going to be an amendment to your lease. It has to be in writing. It has to be executed by both parties. And it is essential that you have someone look at it. So we wish we had a magic wand for everyone and had great solutions. But all we can say is you really do need to do some soul searching, look at your business, look at what your requirements are. Do you have personal guarantees? If you don't have any personal guarantees or any guarantees whatsoever, you may be in a better position. And perhaps, while we can't give you legal advice, perhaps your solution is to move on and vacate the space. And you may even be able to, if the landlord has no other recourse, the landlord may give you a surrender agreement and allow you to walk away. The other option, look at your good guy guarantee if you have one. See if you can get everything out of your space. If you just have no choice and you need to have a vacant space in order to avoid personal liability, move all of your belongings out. Again, have legal counsel look at your guarantee and determine what you need to do to comply with it. Right now, it is difficult because you technically have to be out of the space, so it's vacant in most instances for the landlord, and you may need to put the space back into its original position, which would mean that if renovation was done to your space, you may need to put it back as it was pre-renovation. Look at it carefully, but we're talking at difficult times and we have to look at every option, even the most disagreeable options, which may be, I'm going to have to default and I'm going to have to get out of here, and I need to save myself and defray any personal liability to myself. Always keep that in mind. So with that, we would love to answer questions because we are sure that people have many questions, and perhaps during the course of our interchange on the question format, we can come up with some ideas that might be more creative for the participants in the webinar.
Deborah, I have a question for
Thank you
you.
so much. Yeah, yes, everybody's unmuted. Please feel free to answer the question that they are on the chat. I saw so many interesting questions, and please, Ruth, sorry to interrupt you. Please continue.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, Nadia. Deborah, can you just clarify again the whole issue about when the fact that the courts are closed now, what implications that has for tenants, when they're supposed to be reopening, and what that is going to mean?
Right. So as of today, the courts are reopened for business insofar as they are taking new filings. However, remember, the governor put in place these moratoriums on evictions. So you have multiple things happening here. While you may not risk being thrown out of your space, it does not mean that you are absolved of your liability of paying the rent. And every lease is different, and subleases are different from the overlease. So we do have a bit of a reprieve because the courts are reopening, but the amount of litigation that has been sitting there that has not been filed yet is going to be ahead of any of these other actions that are commenced. So in a sense, we have a reprieve. So let's use this time, this reprieve, to look at what we can do and be as creative. In terms of late fees, there may be preclusions on fees. However, I have seen many people through my client base, as well as people I've talked to through the help desk, whose landlords are actually threatening to collect late fees on top of the rent. It seems draconian. It's probably not going to be something that they'll be able to prevail on, but they may see it as a point of leverage. So be mindful of what a landlord can and cannot do. And if you're not sure, certainly reach out for help.
Yeah. I want to address a question. Mitchell Grossman on the chat room brought up a lot of very good points about the sublet market that I think everyone should be aware of, which is the market right now is paused or frozen. However, it is going to reopen. And when is that going to be? My gut tells me September. Though I may be all wrong. But in terms of preparing for the sublease, you're going to want to take some time preparing your sublet marketing materials, analyzing how you want to show the space, studying the floor plans, and really coming up with a good marketing plan so that come September or whenever the market opens, you're all set to go. And I will say that sublet, there were some other comments on the chat that, how are we going to sublet the space? It's not going to be easy. However, I will tell you that during normal times, sublets get a lot of action for the simple reason that sublandlords can significantly underprice the landlords. And this happens, it becomes a total price game. And needless to say, tenants are extremely price sensitive now, as they always are. So a well-structured sublet can actually move even more quickly than a direct space offered by the landlord. It is possible.
Thank you, Ruth. Deborah, we have different questions here. Let's start with a question that was asked at the beginning of our webinar. Have there been any announcements regarding assistance for landlords that would make it easier for them to provide discounts, forgiveness to tenants?
Yeah, so we have not seen any legislation passed. Are there pushes on both sides to have legislation passed for forgiveness and legislation passed for landlords? Certainly there are pushes on both of those ends, but there is nothing there. And so a landlord is like any other company that has the right to apply for payroll protection, an SBA loan, and perhaps they may qualify for Main Street lending, which is a larger loan. If they are able to achieve that type of financing, then certainly there should be a bit of latitude to tenants.
Thank you. This one, I guess, is for Ruth. From Noel, if no lease deals are being done, why would we expect that we can successfully sublet in this environment?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a challenge, and when you can't sublet until you can show space again. So the question is, when are the buildings going to open? When are people going to come into work? And that's when you can start to seriously market your sublet space. As I said before, my gut tells me September is going to be the time.
Okay, thank you.
And just following up on the issue of if you become the sublessor and you become the landlord in effect, be mindful of potential liabilities if your building is not meeting CDC guidelines, is not using the proper chemicals to clean, is not taking proper precautions. So that part of it really needs to be sewn up before you go out there and even attempt to sublet your space.
Yeah. Thank you. I think this is for you, Deborah, or for both. Is the CLA program is threat of ending? Do you know?
I'm not sure which.
The CLA program is threat of ending?
I am unaware of it ending. I don't know if Ruth has.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
Okay, so we have another question from Charles. When should we negotiate with the LL if the LL might receive relief?
Well, I think the relief, I would start to negotiate with the LL right as soon as you can, right now.
Yeah, by now, the landlord, just as everyone else has received their payroll protection or is in process of getting an SBA loan, likewise, the landlord should have received that relief as well. Again, I think one of the negotiation strategies to keep in mind with this is get ahead of it. Now may be even a bit late, but do get ahead of it and don't wait until it is impossible and you're really in a bind. If you can pay for the next couple of months because you have relief, but in month 3 you're not going to be able to pay, get on top of it right now. And again, just as a negotiation proposition, being prepared, being ahead of things. You don't want to be blindsided. You will lose your leverage if you have no money left 3 months from now and you can't pay, you will have no leverage whatsoever. But right now, while you're paying, you're in a better place to negotiate, because the concept is, I want to keep this tenant happy because they have come forward and paid the rent over the last couple of months.
Thank you. There is a couple of questions regarding the WeWork. So, any insight into regulars of WeWork or spaces, and also example. Another question I saw regarding WeWork. Regulars with stronger WeWork was having problems before the virus hit, and now has a class action suit by members who cannot get into their space. Do you know anything about the WeWork situation?
Yeah, I do. I can address that.
Thank
So,
you.
first of all, whoever said Regus is stronger than WeWork, that was true. I don't know Regis's financials. Regis, however, in the past has gone bankrupt at least once. However, WeWork is much bigger and has, probably 5 times the space Regis has in New York City, if not more. WeWork has hired Jones Lang and Newmark to renegotiate many of their direct leases with the landlords. Now, what does this mean if you're a tenant in WeWork? It means nothing right now. If you're a tenant in WeWork, you have an agreement. It's not a lease. It's a modified license agreement. It's almost akin to like paying for a gym membership or a hotel stay. And you are obligated to pay the rent unless the WeWork doesn't provide access. However, all of the WeWorks are open. Many of the tenants in WeWork are extremely unhappy about paying rent. Exactly in the same way many of the tenants throughout New York City are unhappy about paying rent to their landlord. Those in WeWork are very unhappy about paying WeWork. However, they are obligated to do so. They too have security deposits with WeWork, which WeWork can access in the event that the rent is not paid. One big difference is probably, I would estimate, 40% of the tenants in WeWork are on monthly obligations. So they have an effective option each month to cancel their agreements with WeWork. And I've heard that quite a few have. However, there are many that have longer term obligations with WeWork and are still paying their rent to WeWork. Now, one other thing I'll add is about WeWork enterprise zones. WeWork enterprise spaces, rather. So this is the WeWork concept that was launched about 2 years ago, where WeWork leases bigger space and they lease the entire space to the tenant. So these are typically spaces of about 10,000 feet. WeWork builds the space and they lease the entire space to one tenant. Now, if something happens to WeWork and WeWork stops paying the rent to the landlords are hoping that the WeWork tenants in the enterprise spaces will start paying rents directly to the landlord and stay in their space. Though, of course, that's an opportunity potentially for a renegotiation as well.
Thank you, Ruth. Another question, I guess, for you. If you find a new tenant to take over your space, does your landlord have to legally let you out of your lease?
Right. So that is all dependent on your sublease assignment clause that's in your lease. In the vast majority of cases, you will not be released from your lease. You, in fact, will have to stay on, and the subtenant will pay rent to you, the sublandlord, and you, the sublandlord, will continue paying your rent to the landlord.
Okay.
Yes, in most instances, that would be an assignment of your
Yeah.
lease. in most instances, a landlord will not agree to that. Now, let's be creative. Maybe you find someone to take your space that is, an anchor tenant for your building and has great financials. Perhaps you can get effect an assignment. Most leases have a clause that say no assignments. However, in the event that you find a great potential subtenant, you might approach the landlord and say, will you let me out? I'm bringing Amazon into the space. That may be an option, but generally you remain on the hook. And the other issue is, just because you are allowed to sublet does not mean that your landlord has to let you. Again, every lease is different. You should go over it with your attorney, but it may say that it needs the landlord's approval. It may say the landlord cannot unreasonably withhold approval, but the landlord might find that the tenant you have proposed is not a solid, sound tenant and may be too much of a problem, or there's something in the business that they do that does not meet the requirements of the building, and they may say to you, sorry, we will not allow you to sublet to this tenant. But always keep in mind, if you sublet, you are ultimately still responsible for the landlord, even if your subtenant defaults. So it is some relief, but it is not a panacea for the problem.
Yeah, and I think that you also raise another good point, Deborah, that, well, first of all, I'm hearing that now the landlords they're going to be very lenient when it comes to approving any sublease. However, in most leases in New York City, in office leases, there are clauses that you can't sublease to entities that create a lot of traffic for the building, such as government entities, employment offices. So these are tenants that landlords really don't like. And that is a restriction that the landlords are still going to adhere to, because this is going to be a bigger issue than ever, the traffic in the building, as in the elevators, in the lobby, etc.
So, Ruth, what following the same question from Katie, what if they start a new lease with the landlord?
Well, that would mean that the landlord has agreed to let you out of the lease and has agreed to let your lease affect an assignment. That's a whole different story. That means that you're off the hook. If the landlord get that in writing, if they're taking on a new tenant into your space with a whole new lease, definitely get that in writing.
Thank you. Other question. Sorry about that. Was there a bill passed by New York City that removes the personal guarantees on your lease?
I am unaware of a bill being passed. I've heard a lot of people saying that they thought legislation was passed, but what has happened when we look into it, it appears as though there have been proposals, but they have not been passed. But this is ever evolving, and so certainly check in with the help desk. We do provide up-to-date information as to legislation which is passed. There have certainly been a lot of people who are involved in local politics who have been part of these webinars, and you will get cutting-edge information through the Chamber of Commerce.
Right. So I know that it doesn't is not related to small businesses, but we have here 2-3 questions. Maybe we can go over quickly regarding residential. So do you know anything about it? So how could someone address it? They asking if we can address quickly something about residential rentals.
Right. So we have had instances where people have come to us for assistance on working with landlords in the residential arena. By and large, the parameters are similar insofar as a lot of people are approaching their landlords because they may have unemployment, but it still may not cover the rent. We are seeing, again, this is anecdotal evidence. We're seeing some landlords saying, sure, we'll reduce your rent if you stay or if you agree to renew. Some landlords are digging their heels in and saying, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I have talked to some landlords who are being very helpful and saying, look, I understand people are in a bind. I'm good. I don't have a mortgage on this property and I'm going to let people slide for a few months. But certainly no one can be evicted right now. But the parameters are going to be the same. If it's a residential situation, get in touch with your landlord. Don't wait until it's impossible for you to pay and see what can be achieved. Maybe it's a shorter lease term. Maybe it's a sublet in your apartment building. Maybe it's a reduction in rent or a temporary reduction in rent, or right now there should only be a month of security that's being held because the rent laws have changed, but assume there's a month of security, use the security deposit. The concepts that we're proposing for the commercial arena, maybe on a smaller scale for residential, would likely apply in terms of negotiation strategy.
Thank you, Ruth. Do you have anything to add to this?
No,
Okay.
nothing more.
So we have another question for both of you. What kind of statistics and anecdotes have you heard about what people are negotiating on commercial rent forgiveness?
Yeah, well, I've heard basically it's few and far between. The landlords I hear are really only giving any forgiveness when the tenant shows via their financial statements, their bank statements, their accountant that they are desperately in need of forgiveness. And then in those cases, I am hearing perhaps the most common strategy is for the landlord to dip into the security deposit of the tenant. So if there was a 6-month security, for example, the landlord is taking 2 months of that security out now and applying it to, say, May and June rent. And then the tenant there's an agreement whereby the tenant then has to replenish that security a couple of months later. I mean, everything is negotiable.
Thank you. So regarding the bill, so Katie just wrote that she quoted from email from SBS. The council passed a bill that temporarily prohibits the enforcement of personal liability provision in commercial lease involving COVID-19 impacted tenants. So,
right, but that's a temporary measure. That does not mean that 6 months from now, when the moratoriums are lifted, that there will be no personal liability. It may diminish the liability, but it does not extinguish personal liability forever.
right. So, do you, let me see. So if anyone has have another question for our speakers today, please type the question on our chat room. I think we try to cover everything. And then again, if you have further questions, you can email our help desk at manhattancc.org or call the 212-473-7875. So, but we have here, so another question. How does it not extinguish liability forever?
It said the quote says temporarily prohibits. That means that a landlord cannot today come in and use a personal guarantee. It's a temporary measure. It doesn't mean that in the future the bill may extinguish it forever, but right now it says temporarily.
Right. So we need to follow the quote as it is. I think that all the questions more or less have been answered. So Ruth, do you want to add anything in general before we wrap?
Yeah, I would just add just one other thing about if you're, another thing with the sublets, tenants looking to do something quickly is don't hesitate to use your own networks of people. If you know anyone that wants to come in and just like rent a couple of offices from you, really keep an open mind to anything. I mean, it's all about reducing your liability. So look at all options.
Yeah, and to follow up on what Ruth just said, many times there are desk sharing arrangements, which means that you are basically giving a space within your office to another company. So certainly, if you're in a situation where you can meet part of your rent, but not your entire rent, and you have a safe area where you might be able to share space with someone who needs an occasional office or the use of a conference room, then certainly, use social media, use LinkedIn, and try and find others who might be interested in that, because it may well be that someone is finding it onerous to work from home and does need a place to come to meet with clients. And again, this shall pass and this shall change, and there will be more opportunities as people get back to business.
So, Deborah, I saw a question on our questions room. I have a good guide guarantee on my lease. Does that provision allow me to break my lease and fall back on this good guy guarantee?
So we cannot provide legal advice, and we certainly can't do that without seeing the document. But the way a good guy guarantee would work is if you have a good guy guarantee, you can escape personal liability if you meet the requirements of the guarantee. Generally, it means you are leaving the space, you're leaving it in its original condition, and you are vacating, you're taking out all of your belongings. You don't have a partner who decides to stay behind in the space. So if you meet all the requirements of the good guy guarantee, then you will escape having to be personally responsible. And that means your company is not off the hook, but you are not personally responsible to the landlord.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deborah and Ruth, again for this follow-up. Yeah. It was very successful, I can say. We had a lot of participants today. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Again, if you have further questions, please email the help desk at manhattancc.org or call the 212-473-7875. Also, for further and upcoming events, please visit our website, which is manhattancc.org. Again, manhattancc.org. And so please stay in touch. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. We will be back with other events, virtual events soon. And for today, thank you again to everyone.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you,
Nadia.
Nadia, for
Deborah.
your wonderful moderation
Thank you.
today. Thanks so much.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.